It certainly is more intricate than what I might have envisioned before. It's not just a laundry list of who gets what. And I totally understand the need for a will. Everybody knows what a will is, but my question is, what's a trust? Is that better than a will? Is that different than a will? Is that just for the uber wealthy? Yeah. A trust versus a will?
I think that when you finally get somebody convinced they need to do some planning, and they walk in your office and they're, I understand that it's not things that people like to do to go see a lawyer, but when they get the courage and they come in and we try to make them feel comfortable, and we start asking them questions, probably the first question that flows out of their mouth is, I've heard about these trusts and we've always known about wills. I don't understand, when do I need a trust, or when is a will sufficient? And I think that's probably the most frequently asked question we receive. And I tell people that, I'll tell you 4 or 5 things that a trust can do that a will can't. And if any of those things get you motivated, you should do a trust. But if none of those things get you motivated, do a will. I mean, this isn't one of these things where you want to make it so complicated you don't do anything. What you want to do is make sure you do something. But if I was to list to you maybe the 4 or 5 things that people think about when they do a trust, I mean, maybe let's walk through a couple of those. I think if you ask the public what's the number one reason they've heard of why people do a trust, you'll hear people talk about avoiding probate. And we'll talk more about probate a little bit later, but everybody's heard about probate and they really don't know what it is, but they do know it's expensive and time consuming, and they know it's something they should try to avoid. A trust can do that, a will can't. Another thing I like about a trust is the fact that you're able to put incentives and restrictions in the estate plan. For example, you have a 2-year-old, you have a 3-year-old, and you and your wife die in a car accident, and all of a sudden you have $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 or whatever the number is that's going to pass to a 2-year-old. I mean, can you imagine what kind of problems that presents? Even legally, if you could do it, what kind of problems it presents? Well, in a trust, we can appoint a trustee. And we can spell out the timing of when you want these kids to receive their inheritance, and who makes decisions and helps them with financial decisions concerning where they're going to go to college and how much it's going to cost, and what about if they need to buy a home, or what if they want to start a business. And all these things, in time, your kids will be able to make those decisions on their own, but we'll talk about at what age they should have these responsibilities. And if they're younger than these ages, then we want to have a trustee in place that they can talk to. I mean, you can't do those kinds of things in a will. In a will, a typical will, I leave everything to my spouse, and you die, and everything passes straight to the spouse. With the trust, we can have these incentives and these restrictions. Another benefit of a trust would be estate planning. It'd be to avoid estate taxes. And we'll talk more about estate taxes later on, but let's simply say at this point, if you have a trust, you're going to be able to pass twice as much tax-free if you're married than you would be if you just had a will. So all these reasons you kind of put them in a mix. If you want to avoid probate, if you want to have some incentives and restrictions on your kids, if you want to save taxes. How about privacy? Trusts are private, wills are public. You can go down to the courthouse tomorrow and find out your neighbor across the street passed away, and an inventory's filed, and you can see what all of his assets are. With the trust, you don't have that.
So what you're saying is there's actually more than one type of trust.
Yeah, I mean, that's what makes this complicated. I mean, people hear about a trust, and in reality, I've had people ask me, well, how many different types of trust are there? And literally you probably have 20, 30, maybe even 40 different kinds of trusts that are very specialty types. But the most common the one you hear the most about, the one you see seminars in the newspaper, the ones that you see on the internet, most commonly we're talking about the revocable living trust, or people will just call it a living trust. But that's the type of trust that you set up while you're alive, and it's completely revocable while you're alive. It has virtually no maintenance to it. You don't have to file a separate income tax return. You don't have any reporting requirements. They're very simple to create. They're very simple to maintain. And then upon your death, the trust would become irrevocable. It would make sure that your wishes are carried out. It'll give you these tax benefits and these kinds of things we talked about.
Are there other types that are commonly used?
Yeah, I would think in estate planning, I mean, most people are out there, they're watching the news and they're seeing the Wall Street Journal and they're talking to their neighbors, and there's other types of trust that you hear about. For example, you know, the revocable living trust we just talked about is the most common, but people have heard of what they call an ILIT, which is an irrevocable life insurance trust. And there's some things that you can do with life insurance inside of this trust that's very valuable. Then you hear about a personal residence trust, and you know, and law firms will call them QPERTs, standing for Qualified Personal Residence Trust. These are very specialized trusts that you just put your house in there, you put your vacation home. But you know, trust can do so many things. I mean, we don't have time to get into them, but you talk about the creditor protection aspect, you talk about the tax aspect, you talk about providing incentives and restrictions for your children. I mean, there are just so many neat things that you can do with a trust.
Well, let me ask you this about a trust. In this economy, I've got to ask about creditor protection.
Yeah. Wow, what a run it's been the last few years, hasn't it? I mean, you know, I don't know if you ever thought you'd see a day like this. I never thought we would, and a lot of Americans are struggling. And you know, it kind of started out where, you know, it was people that were thinly capitalized that were having financial problems. Now we're getting to situations where you have some very big hitters that are going down. And creditor protection is an interesting topic because most people don't want to think about it while times are good and they're paying their bills and they're rocking and rolling in real estate. But right now, when you see the wheels fall off, I think that's one of our most common phone calls people call in. It's, I'm losing my house, I'm losing my business, my loved one's getting ready to go into a nursing home. Are we going to have to lose everything, or are there things that we can do to protect? And the message there, Ken, is people need to come in and plan before the storm hits. I mean, once the storm hits, as attorneys, we're very limited in what we can do as far as creditor protection. But if people come in and they have the foresight to think, what happens if the wheels do fall off, and they do some proper planning, there's some wonderful trusts that we can create that can give those kinds of creditor protection, not only for yourself, but what about your children? We had a case one time where a client up in Sedona died, and he had 3 children, and his son was in the middle of a bankruptcy in New York. And so that 1/3 share went straight to the bankruptcy court. What a shame. With proper planning and proper design, that could have gone to a trust and been protected.